Okay, greetings everyone. This is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today we're going to take a look at another of my games from Chicago. I believe this was played, well, I know it was played, not in the last tournament that I played in May, but in the one before that in April. So that event didn't turn out very well for me at all. However, this was a bright spot in that tournament, and I think I played generally fairly well in this game against Gauri Shankar. So I had white in this game, and we're going to break this one up into a couple of parts, and I think that's going to prove quite helpful for the instructional value of the game. And there are two reasons for this. One is simply that there's just a lot of content in the game, and so it rather than try to cram it all into one very long show, or not to do it the content justice, I think it's better to split it up. But the second thing is that the game consists of, let's say, two very distinct halves, and just from that point of view as well, it's worth breaking it up. So you sort of go through the first part, and then after we've had a chance to cleanse our mental palates, so to speak, we can proceed with part two. So let's go ahead and begin here. I had white in this game, and the opening is the same as the game that we saw last week, or at least if you're keeping up, as I produced these shows, the game last week, where I had white against the local expert. So I didn't divulge his name. So again, it's a Najdorf. I'm white, and I played this line with bishop to e3 and knight f3. Now this game that we're showing, that we're seeing now, was played a couple of weeks, I believe, before the game that I showed last week. Okay, and the game that I just showed continued h6, bishop c4, bishop e6, bishop e3, and then here I played knight h4. And my opponent didn't react in the best way. He played knight to c5, and I won a pawn and went on to win kind of a technical game sometime later. All right, but this is the game during which, the game I'm showing you now, is the game during which I kind of came up with this knight h4 idea, and, well, we'll see how it works in this case. Okay, so my opponent played bishop to e7, which is a more normal continuation, though the two can transpose. Again, white's idea in this variation, for those who may have forgotten or didn't see last week's show, what white is trying to do is to really gain very strong control over the d5 square. So it's in some ways analogous to a Sveshnikov Sicilian. The good thing for white is that his knight on f3 is a little bit better placed than the knight on a3, though if this knight on f3 is to find its way to support of the d5 square, it's going to take it some time too. So in any case, that's white's big trump in this variation. Okay, so white will typically play things like bishop to g5 with the aim of exchanging here, bring the bishop to c4. Conceivably, this knight from f3 could go on a little journey to e3. And again, it's all about trying to clamp down on the light squares. And black, for his part, is going to try to thwart this plan and perhaps go for a queenside counterplay with maybe b5 at some point, or play a la the Sveshnikov Sicilian and attempt to achieve f5. So, strategically interesting position. It won't neatly fit into Sveshnikov Sicilian categories. It's not going to transpose, but there are some family resemblances. Alright, so here I played bishop to c4. My opponent castled, I castled, bishop to e6, bishop b3. And again, so far this is all quite normal theory. One move here is knight to c6. This is the main move, after which white has a choice between queen to e2. So simply developing and preparing to bring a rook to the d file, or playing, again, the thematic bishop to g5. And, okay, well, I'll leave the details of either of these variations to your investigation of databases or books, but I'll discuss my opponent's plan instead. So he played h6, which cuts out the bishop to g5 idea altogether. And so here I continue with queen to e2, one of the usual moves after knight to c6. But now I think, in retrospect, and this again goes to the game that I showed last time, I think now that perhaps knight to h4 is a very sensible way to proceed. So it's not clear that I want my queen on e2, and even if I do want my queen on e2, that I should bring it there straight away. So I think the delaying that and expediting the knight's journey or possible journey to squares like f5 or even g6 is worthwhile. All right, but in the game, none of this struck my attention just yet. So it's only after queen to e2 and my opponent played knight b to d7 that I began to get concerned. So my initial intention was simply to play the move rook a to d1. Again, kind of building up on this d5 square. But then I realized that the move rook to c8 could prove quite embarrassing, actually. So the point is that I can't really play knight to d5 yet because this pawn on e4 is going to hang if I play knight d5. And also, if it's black's move, he may simply play rook takes c3, and then knight takes e4. And, alright, this isn't as bad as it would be if I'd castled queenside. But it's still, I think, probably a reasonably comfortable position for black. Though perhaps some complications like bishop takes e6 need to be worked through. One idea is, okay, if f takes e6, queen c4, d5, maybe rook takes d5 is going to prove quite strong here. So takes, king over, queen e4, and in this position, white is up a pawn. Granted, the queenside pawn structure isn't very good, but black's e5 pawn is also weak. The b7 pawn is hanging, and rook to d1 could be good as well. So that might be one possibility. After bishop takes e6, we would also need to investigate a move like knight takes c3. And here, okay, this is just a very interesting and unclear kind of position. So perhaps queen c4, knight takes, and then we take on, well, we can't take on d7 because the knight takes e3. So if we went this route, we would play bishop takes f7, rook f7, rook d1, and this time it's white as a pawn down, and probably without sufficient compensation. So again, it looks like this rook takes c3 idea is good. Of course, one thing to note is that we gave black two moves in a row there, but my point was just that this was an idea that concerned me, this exchange sacrifice possibility. So that motivated me here to try to figure out what exactly it is that I'm going to do about my e-pawn. So I need to defend this guy, and of course I want to do it in a way that's not going to completely discombobulate my pieces. So what I eventually came up with, as you can probably guess at this point, is the move knight to h4. And if nothing else, I could meet rook a to c8 with f3. Maybe. I don't know that I want to play that, but the point is I at least do have that option. Also, queen f3 could be possible, and there may be other ideas as well, such as bishop takes on e6, and then knight to g6, taking on e7, and then playing f3. So quite a few ways I can proceed. Actually, I wouldn't have to take on e7 right away either. At any rate, so some things that need to be calculated. One obvious idea should leap to your mind here directly, and it's the possibility of knight takes e4. Okay, so this should spring to mind straight away here. And of course I spent a good deal of time calculating these possibilities, as did my opponent. In fact, here I think he spent about 40 minutes on his next move. And then ironically I spent about 40 minutes on the move after that, and then he spent a bunch more time on the third half move from here. So we started to really have to calculate some deep variations here. Alright, so let's take a look at, for example, bishop takes b3 and then knight takes e4, which I think is the way that he should do it if he's going to do it. Alright, so knight e4, bishop h4, knight takes d6. So this is the basic point. And here I simply regain my pawn, and I'm threatening the b7 pawn, and I'd also like to simply play something like rook f to d1, queen goes to maybe c4 or g4 or even h5, and in every case I have very good play. And it's also useful to note that a move like f5, which could in principle be kind of annoying for me, is really in fact not a big deal. Among other things, I could simply play knight takes b7, and if he tries queen to b8, I just play knight c5, and I'm fine. Or I could even play queen c4 check, and then grab the bishop. And alright, while black has a little bit of counterplay with this nice pawn duo here in the center, it's probably not enough to compensate for the pawn. Okay, and as I said, I could also just play knight c5, and here white certainly has an edge. Excuse me. Okay, the other possibility is queen c7, which prevents the knight from coming to c5, or at least it might seem that way. But in fact, white can play this, and after takes, play queen c4 check, when the option then is to recapture this piece, or to recapture this piece. So the bottom line then, I think, is that this idea of bishop takes b3 fall, by knight takes e4 really isn't that strong for black. And especially because he can't play f5 without giving up a pawn. So after, as I said, quite a bit of thought, my opponent played the move b5. And this actually is a very interesting move. So this does a number of things. First of all, it brings about, once again, a threat to my e-pawn. So black threatens to simply play b4, and after my knight moves, to capture on e4. Second, as you'll recall from the variations we just looked at, very often white had to make use of the check with the queen on c4. Right, so let's just go back to that for a second. So if black played bishop takes b3 instead, right, we saw in a number of lines, for example, queen b8, there was queen c4, or knight c5. Okay, so this line didn't have it, but the queen c7 line, again, there was queen c4. Okay, so after b5, now there's no queen c4. So there's the threat of b4. He's ruled out queen c4. And so once again, I have kind of a dilemma here. So the first thing I had thought of was to simply play the move a3. But I was not really so sure about something like this. Bishop takes b3, cb, knight e4, knight e4, takes, and then f5. All right, so this kind of bothered me. There's no queen c4. My knight could be a little bit stranded. Maybe f4, f3 is coming. So I wasn't so sure what to think about that. And so I started thinking rather deeply here. So next thing I calculated was, let's say, rook a to d1. So what if I just try to centralize my pieces and allow this sacrifice? So b4, knight d5, and then here I looked at lines like, okay, if he plays knight takes d5, e takes, okay, this is very good for me. This I would be quite happy with. If he plays bishop takes, then pawn takes, and again here I'm pretty happy because even though my bishop on b3 is locked out of the game for the moment at least, my knight can come to f5, and this is a very good square. And my bishop on b3 could rejoin the action a number of ways. So I could push the c pawn somewhere, c4, c3, and bishop c2, or I could play bishop to a4. That's not such a bad square. Or I could play bishop c4, bishop d3. So all of these are possible. Okay, so going back to the position after knight to d5, of course the key question is, what if knight takes e4? And here again there's a whole swarm of variations to be worked through. So just some of the stuff I looked at, and again these variations are unedited, so there are some errors in the calculations, but it's at least giving you an honest picture of what I looked at here when I was considering what to do after my opponent played b5. So I looked, of course, at bishop takes h6, which discovers this attack. And if he takes here, then I'm very happy. I take, and queen e4. And, of course, this is terrific for me, and it helps that f5 is absolutely worthless because of knight takes f5. All right, but I also saw that black could play bishop takes h4, and now on queen takes e4, g takes h6, and it looks like I'm simply out a piece. All right, so I wasn't so happy about that. So here after knight takes e4, the next thing I considered instead of bishop takes h6 was knight takes e7 check straight away. Okay, so queen takes. All right, again, considered bishop takes h6, but here, again, not g takes h6, queen e4, which we just saw, but queen takes h4, and this doesn't work for me at all. Here I'm, again, out of piece. So bishop takes e6, and now, okay, not f takes e6 because the knight's at g6 with a fork, but queen e6. Okay, and now once again we consider bishop takes h6, and this time it looks like it's playable. Okay, so now the queen is no longer hitting, his queen's no longer on e7, hitting my knight on h4. So this one does work out, but I think here I didn't like f5 so much. Alright, so it seemed as if my pieces were a bit awkward, and I was more impressed by the strength of this central phalanx rather than my having a bishop as opposed to a knight. So it seemed like my pieces were a bit scattered and uncoordinated. I'm not sure that that's right. I mean, I think the position is roughly equal, but okay, this is at any rate why I rejected this. But I did consider also, yeah, queen takes h6 here, queen e4, and I looked at lines like this and thought I was okay here. And one other line was to continue the desperados, so knight f2, bishop g7. I thought I was probably okay here, but this was kind of murky as well. So at any rate, I came to the conclusion that this was playable, but it wasn't really my first choice. I hoped for something better. Okay, so we looked at a3, we looked at rook a to d1. Next up, I considered knight to g6. And here, okay, bishop takes b3, and now if knight takes f8, there's bishop c4. So knight e7, queen e7, ab. And again, I would like my position if it were my move, but he gets b4 in. And so I'm going to lose my e4 pawn unless I play knight to d5, I think. Maybe bishop takes h6 possibilities are in the air. But anyway, I didn't like this because it takes, and f5. And once again, I've lost control over the d5 square while he has this nice pawn duo. Again, I wouldn't say that black is better. It's just that I prefer to avoid such a position. But maybe as I consider such a position more, I might my opinion might change, and maybe this isn't. Maybe white has better prospects here than I had initially believed during the game. Okay, so in any case, I didn't think this was so hot, and I moved on to yet another possibility. Bishop takes e6, f takes e6, now knight to g6, and then f4. And I believe I mentioned something somewhat like this last week, though I think that version was a little bit better for me than this one. Okay, so here, again, I continue my calculations because, once again, the e-pawn is a concern after the move b4. Alright, so in this position I looked at f takes e5, b takes c3, and now I calculated, again, another pair. So e takes f6, and then there's this. Okay, if the rook moves, rook takes f6, so this. Alright, who knows what's going on here. Both sides have kind of ragged pawn formations, so I thought that this would be, well, I just thought that this was kind of unclear. I really wasn't sure what was happening. When I calculated this during the my long think, I also considered knight e7 here with crazy lines like this, and of course this is to my favor, but black can improve in various ways. All right, so instead of c takes b2, I also looked at bishop takes f6, and okay, this seemed quite reasonable. And then here I also looked at knight takes e7. And I think this was yet another line that I thought was approximately equal, but kind of unclear. And I think I slightly preferred black here. So while his d6 pawn and a6 pawn are a little bit weak, it seemed to me that my bishop on b2 wasn't so good, and of course I have a weak c2 and e4 pawn as well. So probably about equal. Okay, and then one final thing that I considered was just the immediate knight to f5, and okay, black just plays b4. But I mean, I looked further than this, but again, this seemed roughly at a dead end. So that was quite a lot to examine, and then to try to evaluate, and to make sure that I got everything right. And you know, it's a little bit frustrating. So I finally decided that I could play the move a3, and that's what I ended up doing. So after all of that time, I went back to the original plan A. And what was funny is that, again, after bishop takes b3, cb, knight e4. Okay, here also another thing that I calculated before we get to the move which I played was knight takes e4, was knight f5. So this seemed interesting, at least in principle. I'm sacrificing a pawn, but this knight on f5 could be terrific. So something like knight c3, queen g4, where I'm threatening mate, I'm threatening a take on h6 in various ways, and of course, I can recapture on c3 later on. One problem with this, though, I think, is that black has the nifty little resource knight to e2 check. And at some point I'm going to have to go back and capture the knight, so I might as well do it now. Okay, and then black can play g6. And this position, again, seemed to be kind of interesting and unclear. So I take the pawn. All right, after king g7, maybe I play knight to g4. And although my knight's trapped, if he could play f5, the good news for me is that I have bishop to h6 as a Zwischenzug there. So I thought probably king to h7 would be the better move. Okay, and now knight to g4 would be strongly met by f5. But now queen to g4 is kind of interesting. So f5, queen h3, king g7, and I wasn't that happy with this position, though. Again, it may not be so bad for me, but I wasn't sure that the knight was going to be very happy there. I was worried about things like rook h8 and bishop to g5, and wasn't persuaded really that my attacking prospects were fast enough. But maybe they are. I mean, maybe I can play, for example, something like rook a to d1. And, okay, so that'll take care of bishop to g5 ideas because if rook takes d6. And if rook to h8, okay, I'm not sure. Certainly moves like knight takes f5 have to come into consideration, but whether it's real or complete baloney, I'm not sure. Well, maybe I could play... Oh, no, I can't play f4. Yeah, all right, well, so anyway, knight f5 would be the most obvious thing here. And, okay, I probably don't believe it, but it's at least possible. Maybe something like f4. Anyway, could be some chances here. It's a fun position, but I decided that I didn't want to have this much fun during the game, and wanted to try to keep some control. So I played knight takes e4, bishop h4, and here a move I didn't consider during the game, but perhaps should have, is rook f to d1, or rook a to d1. So I didn't have to capture on d6 straight away, though it's not really clear that anything's wrong with knight takes d6. All right, so I took, and here, I mean, the move that had bothered me for so long was simply f5. So I was really surprised that my opponent, who had been taking forever on almost every move, almost immediately played the move queen to f6. So that came as kind of a shock to me, actually, that he didn't get his kingside majority starting to roll down the board. Now, in fact, his decision might have been right. So again, perhaps I was overvaluing the strength of this pawn duo during the game. So here, white has a number of ways to proceed. He can either, I think, basically come down to two things: either push the f pawn, one square or two, or bring a rook to the d file. So, for example, rook a to d1. All right, the thing that looks a little bit scary about this is that it simply allows something like f4. The bishop has to retreat to somewhere kind of stupid, at least seemingly stupid, like d2, and then maybe black has possibilities like f3. But I think the thing about this is that once you come to the position and actually examine it, it's not so clear that this is really all that wonderful for black. So we just take the pawn, and white has quite a few real strengths in the position. All right, so this bishop, which doesn't look so good, can go to c3 or b4, both of which are pretty good squares. The queen can come to e4. This pawn on e5 is a bit weak. There's pressure along the d file. The knight may come back to f5 or to e4 at some point. And white's king really isn't in that much danger. I mean, he can simply play king h1 and rook to g1. And if anything, the g file might become an asset for me. So I think white is actually in pretty good shape here. All right, another possibility after f5 is to simply play f4 and blockade these the central pawns. So okay, black can play g4 Again, I could maybe centralize my rooks with, I think, pretty good play. And also maybe a move like queen to h5 could be possible as well. So, in any case, I think white is definitely better here. And the main reason why is that his pawn duo, while it looks imposing, and I would say at least scared me off a little bit, it's not really mobile, because either pawn that pushes, they're not going to be able to, let's say, both get to e4 and f4. That's one way perhaps of expressing the problem. So if they could both keep advancing, then that would be great. But the fact that they can't really advance, I mean, if either one advances, there's going to be a solid blockade, indicates that these pawns, which are functioning kind of like hanging pawns, are perhaps at least as much a weakness as a strength. So in any case, I'm better here, but queen f6 perhaps minimizes the damage, though at the time I was very happy to see this. Alright, well now I played rook a to d1, though only after considering a cute idea that doesn't, however, really work perfectly. So my cute idea was to play queen g4, hitting the knight on d7, of course, maybe with the idea of knight to e4, sometimes maybe bishop takes h6 or knight f5. Anyway, it just puts the queen on a good aggressive square where it can start threatening things. Now the obvious drawback is queen takes d6, but okay, rook a to d1, and then rook takes d7, and this seemed pretty good. However, the problem is knight to f6, and I did see this in advance. And after queen h4, queen e6, black is in very good shape. Say I play b4, knight to d5, and black's pieces are working very nicely here. His knight in particular is a very good piece. If I play bishop to c5, then okay, he'll have to move his rook first, but a subsequent knight to f4 should be quite pleasant for him. So I rejected queen to g4 after queen f6 by black, and played rook a to d1. And again, I'm quite happy. So I mean, I've got this nice initiative. I'm threatening knight takes b5, maybe threatening knight to e4, queen to g4, all sorts of stuff. Okay, but black's move is good, queen to e6, and now, okay, he's protecting his knight on d7. He's covering the g4 square, so my queen can't go there, and he's clearing the path for this f-pawn, perhaps to start rolling once again. Okay, so I played queen to h5, hitting his bishop, played bishop to e7, and now maybe knight to f5 is a little better than what I played, but I like what I played. I think it was a very nice idea. I played queen to f5. And, of course, the threat is to simply take on e6 and destroy his pawn structure, and then maybe I can also follow up with knight takes b5 and rook takes d7. So here I was very happy with my position. So I felt as if I had achieved, I don't know if I thought I was quite strategically winning yet, but a pretty serious edge at this point. I was definitely quite happy. This was a cute idea that I saw now, which was kind of a funny counterpart to this queen g4 idea a few moves ago. So remember here, queen to g4 takes here, and then knight f6 was this kind of a clever swish and zoog to mess things up. All right, well, after queen to f5, one funny line I saw, and I hoped he would fall into, was queen f6, with a kind of similar idea. This time I take the piece, he plays rook a to d8, trying to regain it, and then here I've got the knight move, knight e4, which would completely destroy black's game. I just win here on the spot. So I was hoping for that, but my opponent found a very interesting, a very surprising continuation that shows a real nice tactical imagination on his part. He played knight to c5, and at first this looked just crazy. I mean, very surprising move. The basic idea, of course, is that if I play queen takes e6, then he doesn't destroy his pawn structure. He keeps it intact with knight takes e6. Alright, but of course it looks like just a blunder at first sight, because I can play bishop takes c5, which in fact I did play. But the point is queen takes f5, knight takes f5, bishop c5, and he's managed to keep his pawn structure intact and hasn't lost any pieces or anything else so far. But in fact he is losing a pawn now. So rook to d5, bishop d4, takes, rook takes, rook f to d8, rook f to d1, takes, takes, rook c8. Okay, so pretty rapidly we went from this very tense early middle game into a pure rook ending. So kind of a remarkably rapid transformation of events here. And this is where we're going to leave off. But before I cut out here, and before you head for the exits, let me try to set this up a little bit. So I've got an extra pawn, of course. It's a doubled pawn, but it's not so meaningless because there could be quite a few positions where, let's say, black grabs my b pawn and I grab his a pawn, and let's say my pawn's on b4. So that kind of situation could happen fairly commonly. So it's perhaps not as good as a full pawn. Let's say if my pawns were on, if we moved this pawn from b3, if it were on c3, okay, then it would be a pure extra pawn, and I would say that white is clearly winning in such a case, or at least should be winning in such a case. But this pawn is not, let's say, is not completely worthless either. It's not like instead of having a pawn on b3, I have it on h3, where it really would be kind of stupid. Okay, so white has a couple of things to decide here in the long term. Of course, the first thing you have to decide is what to do about the threatened mate. But what I need to decide is I need to make some fundamental decisions about the arrangement of my queenside pawns, and also, though, about the arrangement of my kingside pawns. So what should I do on both sides of the board? So with the queenside, I have to decide a few things. So one is, do I want to keep the structure as stable as possible and bring my king over before trying to make anything happen over there, or not? Do I want to try to achieve a passed A pawn or a passed B pawn? Which pawns am I willing to exchange over there, and which do I need to keep on the board? Okay, so those are all very important decisions that need to be worked out as best as possible. But also on the king side, I have to decide how to arrange my pawns, and or conversely, how best to interfere with my opponent's best arrangement of his pawns. So there's quite a bit to be worked out here, and I'd like to challenge you to try your best to figure out how white should arrange his game on both sides of the board, and likewise for black too. So this is, I think, a very instructive rook ending, one that I believe you can benefit tremendously by studying in some detail. So have a look at this, do the best you can, and next week we'll come back and look at it in some more depth. And also, let me throw in my quick plug here, just to remind everybody to take a look at my blog, chessmind.powerblogs.com, chessmind.powerblogs.com. I think you'll enjoy it. All right, well, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos signing off, and I'll see you next time with the resumption of this game from the 10th North American FIDE Invitational against Gauri Shankar. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.